The old house was quiet, holding its breath. It was a stillness I hadn't felt since I was a child, creeping downstairs on a Saturday morning before the world was awake. But this was a different kind of quiet, a heavy, hollow silence, filled with the ghosts of conversations and the lingering scent of my father's pipe tobacco and old books. My son, Sam, seemed to feel it too. At 10 years old, his usual state of being was a whirlwind of motion and noise. But since the funeral, he'd been subdued, his bright curiosity dimmed by a confusion he couldn't quite name. He trailed his small fingers over the dusty spines of the books lining the hallway, his reflection a pale shadow in the glass of the grandfather clock that had stood silent for years. "Mom," he whispered, his voice startlingly loud in the hush. "Why did Grandpa Richard keep everything?" I managed a weak smile, following his gaze. Every surface was a testament to a life lived, a mosaic of memories. Stacks of National Geographic magazines, teacups from forgotten holidays, little wooden birds he'd carved, their painted eyes seeming to watch us. "He used to say that everything had a story," I murmured, the words catching in my throat, "and he wasn't a man who liked to forget." It was a sentiment that now felt like a cruel irony. We were here to forget, in a way. Or at least, to pack up a lifetime of stories into cardboard boxes, to decide which to keep and which to let go. My brother Jack had fled an hour ago, muttering something about needing air and promising to be back before dark. I couldn't blame him. The weight of our father's absence was suffocating. Sam, however, had a different coping mechanism. His grief was being channeled into a quiet, determined exploration. While I sat at the kitchen table, staring blankly at a legal pad titled Things to Do, he had taken it upon himself to catalog his grandfather's world. He'd spent the morning in the garden, counting the gnomes, and the afternoon in the attic, emerging covered in dust and clutching a vintage train set. Now he had migrated to the heart of the house, my father's study. It was a room I had always revered and, if I'm being honest, slightly feared. It was Richard's sanctuary. The walls were floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, crammed with history and poetry and science. His desk, a formidable slab of dark mahogany, was exactly as he'd left it. A half-finished crossword puzzle, a pair of reading glasses, a cold cup of tea. It was as if he'd just stepped out for a moment. I found Sam not at the desk, but crouched in the corner, by the old, unused fireplace. He was running his hands over the ornate wooden mantelpiece, his brow furrowed in concentration. "What have you found, little explorer?" I asked, trying to inject some lightness into my tone. "There's a bit that's different," he said, not looking up. He knocked on a section of the dark wood. The sound was solid. He knocked again, a few inches to the right. A faint, distinctly hollow echo answered him. His eyes, suddenly bright with purpose, met mine. "See?" I knelt beside him, a flicker of my own childhood excitement stirring within me. My father had loved puzzles and secrets. The idea that one had been hiding in plain sight all these years was both thrilling and deeply, achingly sad. I ran my own fingers over the spot, feeling for a seam, a latch, a hidden button. And there it was, a tiny, almost imperceptible notch in the decorative carving. I pressed it. There was a soft click, and a section of the paneling, no bigger than a shoebox, swung inward, revealing a dark, cobweb-filled cavity. "Whoa," Sam breathed, peering into the darkness. My heart was hammering against my ribs. What could he have hidden? A secret stash of cash? Old war medals? I reached into the space, my fingers brushing against something solid and metallic. I pulled it out. It was a simple tin lockbox, rusted at the edges. It wasn't locked. With trembling hands, I lifted the lid. The contents weren't what I expected. There was no treasure, no pile of money. Instead, there was a stack of letters tied with a faded blue ribbon. Beneath them, a small black and white photograph. And under that, a folded yellow document that looked official, its top bearing the embossed seal of a law firm I didn't recognize. Sam leaned in close, his shoulder pressed against mine. "What is it?" I picked up the photograph first. It showed a much younger version of my father. His hair dark, his smile wide and unguarded. His arm was around a woman. A beautiful woman with dark, intelligent eyes and a cascade of wavy hair. It wasn't my mother. I felt a strange jolt, a sense of trespassing on a history that didn't belong to me. My hands shook as I put the photo down and unfolded the legal document. The formal language was dense, but certain words leaped out at me. Last will and testament of Richard Anderson. But this wasn't the will we had. The date was from 40 years ago. My eyes scanned the text, my breath catching in my chest. It named my mother, and it named Jack and me. But then there was another clause, a significant one. To Isabella Romano, I read aloud, my voice a strained whisper. Currently residing at 14 Willow Creek Lane, Starfall, I bequeath the sum of $50,000 and the deed to the aforementioned property. Who's Isabella? Sam asked, his eyes wide. I shook my head, my mind reeling. I had never, not once in my entire life, heard that name. $50,000 was a fortune 40 years ago. And a house? My father was a man of modest means. An inheritance like that would have been a massive portion of his estate. Finally, I turned to the letters. My fingers fumbled with the brittle ribbon, and it crumbled into dust. I carefully unfolded the top letter. The handwriting was elegant, a flowing feminine script. My dearest Richard, it began. The days feel like years without you. The town is the same, the creek is the same, but everything is muted, as if the color has been drained from the world since you left. Are you happy? Are you well? Please tell me that you haven't forgotten me. The letter was signed, simply, Your Isabella. I sank back on my heels, the letter trembling in my hand. The quiet of the house suddenly felt different. It was no longer empty. It was filled with a secret. My father, the man I thought I knew, the quiet, steadfast rock of my life, had a whole other story. A story named Isabella. The air in the study, once just dusty and old, now crackled with unspoken questions. For a long moment, I could do nothing but stare at the elegant script on the page, the name Isabella echoing in the silence. My father, my quiet, predictable father, who read the paper every morning and did the crossword in ink, had a secret history tucked away behind a fake panel. A history involving a secret inheritance and letters filled with a longing I had only ever associated with my mother. Mom? Sam's voice pulled me back. He was looking at me, his face a mixture of concern and excitement. Are you okay? Who was she? I folded the letter carefully, my movements stiff and automatic. I don't know, sweetie. I've never heard of her. The words felt like a lie, even though they were true. A part of me felt I should have known. A secret this large should have cast a shadow, should have been a presence I could feel, even as a child. Was this the reason for the silences that sometimes fell between my parents? The source of the melancholy that occasionally settled in my father's eyes, which I had always dismissed as simple tiredness? I tucked the letters, the photo, and the old will back into the tin box, the metal cool against my trembling fingers. My first instinct was to hide it again, to push the panel back into place and pretend we'd never found it, to preserve the image of my father I had held so dear. But I couldn't. The lockbox was a story, just as my father had said, and I had to know the ending. What's Starfall? Sam asked, pointing at the legal document I still held. Is that a real place? A quick search on my phone confirmed it was. A small town, nestled in a valley about a 3-hour drive away. It was known for its autumn festival and a series of waterfalls that gave the town its name. It wasn't a place we had ever visited, never even a consideration for a family day trip. It had been Isabella's town. An idea, impulsive and perhaps reckless, took root in my mind. Pack a small bag, Sam, I said, my voice firmer than I felt. Just for the night. Where are we going? He asked, his eyes lighting up. We're going to find a ghost, I replied, a strange sense of resolve settling over me. The drive to Starfall felt like a journey into the past. The highways gave way to winding country roads, flanked by old stone walls and trees just beginning to hint at their autumn colors. The town itself was like a postcard from a bygone era. A single main street with a corner bakery, a hardware store with a weathered wooden sign, and a town square with a picturesque gazebo. It was charming and quaint, and it felt utterly disconnected from my life, from my father's life as I had known it. Willow Creek Lane was on the edge of town, a quiet street that lived up to its name, with a gentle stream running alongside it. The houses were older, modest homes with well-tended gardens. My heart hammered as I slowed the car, looking for number 14. And then I saw it. It was set back a little from the road, a small cottage painted a pale blue, the color of a robin's egg. A profusion of rose bushes, now past their prime, climbed a trellis by the door. It wasn't abandoned or derelict. Smoke curled gently from the chimney, and a light was on in the front window. Someone was home. I parked the car and killed the engine, the silence rushing back in. For a full minute, I just sat there, the tin box heavy on the passenger seat beside me. What was I doing? What did I expect to find? An elderly woman who would break my heart with stories of a lost love? Or worse, a family that would be shattered by the sudden appearance of a secret from their patriarch's past. Are you going to go in? Sam whispered, as if reading my thoughts. Taking a deep breath, I nodded. I have to. I walked up the stone path, Sam a half step behind me, his hand clutching the back of my jacket. I raised my hand to knock, but before my knuckles could touch the wood, the door swung open. A man stood there. He was perhaps a few years older than me, with kind eyes and dark wavy hair that was starting to gray at the temples. There was a startling familiarity in his features, in the line of his jaw and the shape of his smile. He looked at me, then at Sam, and a look of dawning comprehension spread across his face. "I was wondering if you'd ever come," he said, his voice gentle. He glanced back into the house. "Mom, you should see this." He stepped aside, and from the warm, light-filled interior, a woman emerged. She was older, her hair a soft silver, but her eyes were the same intelligent, dark eyes from the photograph. The same eyes that were now looking at me with a mixture of shock, sorrow, and a flicker of something that looked like hope. It was Isabella. The man, Leo, he called himself, led us into a living room that was the mirror opposite of my father's study. Where Richard's space was dark and cluttered, a fortress of books and shadows, this room was bright and airy. Sunlight streamed through clean windows, illuminating colorful woven rugs and walls adorned not with bookshelves, but with paintings of landscapes, waterfalls and forests rendered in vibrant, hopeful colors. Isabella moved with the careful grace of someone whose body was no longer as young as their spirit. She didn't offer platitudes or apologies. Instead, she looked at me with an unnerving directness, her dark eyes searching my face. "You have his chin," she said, her voice softer than I expected, but clear, "and his stubborn brow." She then smiled at Sam, a genuine, warm expression that made him shyly smile back. "And you, young man, you have his curiosity." Richard was always looking for what was hidden. I stood awkwardly in the center of the room, clutching the tin box to my chest like a shield. The scene was surreal, impossibly domestic. Leo offered us tea, and as he moved around the kitchen, I saw it again. The familiar set of his shoulders, the way he hooked his thumb into his pocket. It was like watching a ghost, a younger, more vital version of the father I had just buried. "He told you about us?" I finally managed to ask, the question directed at Isabella. She nodded, sinking into a comfortable armchair. "He told me about your mother, about you and your brother. He told me when you were born, when you graduated, when you got married." Her gaze drifted towards the window. "He didn't want his worlds to collide. He thought it would be a kindness to protect everyone from a complicated truth." A complicated truth? The words sounded harsher than I intended. It was Leo who answered, returning with a tray of steaming mugs. He handed one to me, his fingers briefly brushing mine. The touch was electric, a jolt of unwelcome familiarity. "My father loved your father," he said simply, his voice devoid of any judgment. "And your father loved him. After he had to leave, Richard made sure my mother was taken care of. He bought this house for her. He wrote that will. He wanted to ensure that if anything happened to him, she wouldn't be left with nothing." I stared at him, my mind struggling to assemble the pieces. Leave? Why did he have to leave? Isabella's eyes glistened. Richard's family. They had plans for him. A life laid out, a marriage to a respectable girl from a good family in his hometown. She looked down at her hands, folded in her lap. "That girl was your mother. I was a distraction. The daughter of an immigrant stonemason, a girl he met while doing a summer job. We were a youthful folly in their eyes. He fought them for a while. But Richard was a man who felt the weight of duty more than anyone I've ever known." She spoke of a version of my father I had never met. A passionate, rebellious young man who fell in love with a stonemason's daughter, who dreamed of being a painter. She gestured to the vibrant canvases on the walls, and my breath caught. They were signed R. Anderson, and who was ultimately broken by his own sense of obligation. The father I knew was the man he became after he left Starfall. The quiet, reserved man who had packed away his paints and his passion into a hidden compartment in the mantelpiece. "So he just left you? With a house and some money?" I asked, a fresh wave of anger rising within me, this time on Isabella's behalf. Leo sat down on the sofa opposite me. He looked at Isabella, a silent exchange passing between them, and then he turned his steady, kind eyes to me. "He didn't know about me," Leo said softly. "Not at first. My mother didn't tell him she was pregnant until after he was already married." The air left my lungs. The tin box suddenly felt impossibly heavy. The room tilted, the sunlight seeming to dim. My father had another child. The man sitting across from me, with his familiar smile and my father's artistic hands, wasn't just the son of a long-lost love. He was my brother. I looked at Sam, who had been listening with a child's unfiltered attention. His eyes were wide, darting between me and Leo. He was doing the math, connecting the dots in a way a 10-year-old could understand. He had a grandfather he had just lost, and in the space of an afternoon, he had found an uncle he never knew existed. He visited, Isabella said, her voice pulling me from my spiraling thoughts. Once or twice a year. He would sit in this room, and he would look at his paintings, and sometimes he would cry. He loved your mother. I believe that. But he left his heart here. I sank into a chair, the strength gone from my legs. The quiet old house I had left behind that morning was not filled with the ghosts of one man's life, but two. An entire hidden family, a secret legacy of love and loss and regret, all contained in a rusty tin box. The silence in the room was no longer awkward. It was heavy, weighted with 40 years of what-ifs and the monumental, life-altering truth of the man in front of me. My brother. My fingers trembled as I broke the seal on the final envelope, the one addressed to my sons. Across the room, Leo watched me, his expression unreadable, but his posture tense. He was as much a part of this as I was, yet he was a stranger. Isabella had placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder, a silent anchor in the swirling emotional storm that had become her quiet, sunlit living room. I unfolded the single sheet of paper. The letter was dated just 6 months ago. My father's hand was less steady, the elegant script now bearing the tremor of age and illness, but the words were clear. I took a breath and began to read aloud, my voice a strange, wavering sound in the stillness. To my children, it began. If you are reading this, it means you have found my box of ghosts. I have imagined this moment for 40 years, and I have dreaded it every day. There's no easy way to say this, and no excuse I can offer that will erase the deception. I can only offer you the truth, in the hope that it might, in some small way, build a bridge where I created a chasm. Isabella was the love of my youth. The joy you see in those old photographs was real. The art in that sketchbook was the only true expression of my soul. But I was a coward. I was bound by what I saw as my duty, to my family, to the life they had planned for me. I chose the path of honor, or what I mistook for it, and in doing so, I dishonored everyone, most of all myself. Leo, my son. To know of you but not be able to claim you has been the greatest sorrow of my life. Your mother sent me a photograph when you were born, and I have followed your life from a distance with a mixture of immense pride and searing regret. She gave you a better life than I could have. You are the artist I was meant to be. I hope you can forgive me for being only a shadow in your life. To my children back home, to Jack, and to my dear daughter, do not think that my life with you was a lie. I loved your mother. She was a good and gentle woman who deserved more than a man whose heart was divided. I loved you with every piece of me that I had left to give. The silence and distance you may have felt from me was not a lack of love, but the weight of this secret, a weight I was too weak to set down. The envelope says my sons because I am an old man, set in the foolish ways of my time. But this letter is for my daughter too, perhaps more than anyone. You have my stubborn heart, and I knew if anyone could unravel my messy past, it would be you. I have left you all a fractured legacy. My last wish is not for forgiveness, which I do not deserve, but for connection. You share my blood. You are pieces of my heart, scattered by my choices. Please, do not remain strangers. My life was divided, but yours does not have to be. Your loving and regretful father, Richard. When I finished, the paper fell from my fingers onto the rug. No one spoke. The sunlight streaming through the window seemed to cast everything in a stark, unforgiving light. I looked at Leo, and for the first time, I saw a tear trace a path down his cheek. He wasn't looking at me, but at the paintings on the wall, as if seeing them for the first time through his father's eyes. The anger I had felt was gone, washed away by a wave of profound, aching sadness. Sadness for the man who lived a half-life, for the woman who loved him and raised his son alone, for the mother who never knew the man her husband might have been, and for us, the children, left to assemble the broken pieces of a heart we never fully knew. I looked from Leo, my newfound brother, to my son Sam, who was now standing quietly by my side. I had a brother I had always known, a man of duty and honor just like the man our father had pretended to be. I had to call Jack. This wasn't just my story anymore, it was ours. The phone rang 4 times before Jack picked up. His voice was rushed, businesslike. Hello? Everything all right? Jack, it's me. I paused, the weight of the words I was about to say pressing down on me. You need to sit down. I have something to tell you. I recounted the story, my voice steady now, devoid of the earlier tremor. I told him about the letters, the paintings, about Isabella, and about Leo. On the other end of the line, there was only silence. A deep, profound silence that stretched for so long I thought he might have hung up. Across the room, Leo stood and walked to the window, his back to me, giving me the illusion of privacy for this impossible conversation. "A brother?" Jack finally said. The words were flat, hollowed out. "All this time? A whole other life?" "Yes," I said softly. I have to go," he stammered. "I'll call you back." The line went dead. I knew my brother. Jack was a man who saw the world in black and white, in duty and dereliction. This news would shatter the very foundation of the father he idolized. He would need time. When I looked up, Leo had turned from the window. The earlier tears were gone, replaced by a look of quiet empathy. "He will come around," he said, his voice gentle. "Or he won't. The truth is a difficult guest for some." Isabella returned to the room then, carrying a tray with glasses of water. She moved with a quiet grace, her presence a calming balm. She looked between us, her gaze settling on me. "Your father. He chose his path," she said, as if hearing our unspoken thoughts. "He thought he was protecting everyone. But secrets are not shields. They are walls. I am glad the walls are finally down. For his sake, and for yours." My son, Sam, who had been watching everything with wide, serious eyes, walked over to Leo. He pointed to one of the vibrant canvases on the wall, a whirlwind of color depicting a stormy sea. "Did you paint that?" he asked. Leo knelt down to Sam's level. "I did," he said, a small smile touching his lips for the first time. "My father, our father, he taught me how to see the colors." That simple exchange broke the last of the tension. It was the sound of the future, untainted by the past. We didn't solve everything that day. Jack didn't call back immediately. The grief and the years of deception couldn't be erased in an afternoon. But as the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the living room, something new had begun. I sat with Leo and Isabella, sharing stories, not of the man who hid, but of the man we knew. I told them about my father's silly jokes, his love for gardening, the way he'd hum off key when he was happy. Leo told me about the books on art his anonymous benefactor had sent him every year for his birthday. We were piecing together a mosaic of a man we had all loved, each of us holding a different, vital piece. My father had called it a fractured legacy, and it was. But looking at my son talking with his new uncle, an artist who shared his grandfather's soul, I realized a fractured thing can be remade. It might not look the same. The cracks will always be there, a roadmap of the pain. But it can be pieced together into something stronger, and perhaps even more beautiful. We were not just the scattered pieces of his heart. We were the beginning of a new one,